I used to believe fathers were impenetrable, unshakable, that no matter how much the world shifted, they stood tall, like old oak trees. Mine did once, until he met Sophie. After the divorce, he traded in our worn-down family home for a high-rise apartment with minimalist furniture and a view of the city skyline. It was sterile, like his new life. No photos of me, no old family mementos. Just Sophie's taste, all white, chrome, and cold. So when he invited me to stay during spring break, I already knew what this was. An attempt at redemption, though not necessarily for me. More likely, a staged performance for his new partner. See? I'm a good dad, he probably imagined saying with his eyes, holding me like a trophy for Sophie to admire. I arrived on a rainy Thursday, suitcase in one hand, resentment in the other. Sophie greeted me at the door wearing pastel silk and that impossibly tight smile she always wore, like she'd just swallowed something bitter but was pretending it was sweet. Maya, look at you, you've grown so much, she beamed, arms wide. I let her hug me, limp and unimpressed. Dad came around the corner, phone still in hand. Pumpkin, he said, distracted, offering a quick pat on the shoulder. That was it. No warmth. No spark. Just obligation. Dinner that night was a performance. Sophie played house, serving vegan pasta she assumed I'd like. Dad kept looking between us, nervous, like he expected someone to explode. I just smiled. I remember when Mom made this, I said, spinning my fork. She added Parmesan, though, real cheese. The silence that followed was delicious. Sophie chuckled awkwardly. Dad coughed. I looked at my plate like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. Over the next few days, I observed them. Sophie kissed his cheek when he walked into the room. He responded, but never initiated. She talked about mutual friends I didn't recognize. He nodded, distracted. And when they weren't looking, I tested boundaries. I wore shorts too short for lounging and tank tops that hinted at womanhood. I'd pass through the living room and catch Dad's eyes flicker, then dart away. I wasn't trying to seduce him, not really. It was about control, power, making him uncomfortable, making him look. Are you cold? Sophie asked one evening, glancing at my bare shoulders as we watched a movie. No, I said flatly. But thanks, Mom. She flinched. I didn't smile. That night, I found a pen on Dad's desk and a pad of sticky notes. His handwriting was easy to mimic, slanted, deliberate, a little too neat for a man. I wrote one sentence and tucked the note beneath Sophie's perfume bottle. We need to talk. I can't keep pretending with her here. The next morning, I watched from the kitchen as Sophie found it. Her face didn't change at first, but her hands stilled. She slid the note back, eyes flickering. She didn't mention it, but over breakfast, her tone was sharp and her fork clinked against her plate like punctuation marks. Dad was oblivious, or pretending to be. Either way, I knew the first crack had formed. Later that day, I found Sophie alone in the guest room, rifling through a drawer that wasn't hers. Her face was pale, drawn. She looked up, startled. Looking for something? I asked, voice low, sweetened with just enough venom. I thought this was my drawer, she replied, flustered. I nodded. It's okay, I don't mind sharing. After all, we're family now, right? She left the room without answering. By the third day, Dad seemed exhausted. He rubbed his temples more often, sighed at nothing. Sophie grew colder, offering clipped responses and disappearing into their bedroom for long stretches. I offered Dad tea that night. He accepted. We sat on the balcony in silence. You've changed, I said finally. He looked at me, puzzled. How do you mean? You used to know when people were lying. He frowned but said nothing. I smiled and sipped my tea. He didn't notice the shadows anymore, the subtle shifts in behavior, the psychological splinters I had carefully embedded. This wasn't about Sophie. Not really. She was collateral. I was 10 when Mom cried in the kitchen, mascara streaking down her face, while Dad packed his suitcase and told her this wasn't working. He kissed my forehead like that. Meant something. Then he left. Now, I was older, sharper, and I wanted to know what would happen if I disrupted his new paradise. I wanted to know if he'd still choose me. Because once, I was his whole world. And if I couldn't be loved again, I could at least be noticed. The first real fracture appeared on Sunday morning. Sophie stood in the kitchen, her back stiff as she stirred oatmeal. Dad shuffled in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, yawning like a man who didn't know war had already begun. She didn't greet him, just slid a bowl across the counter with the silence of a withheld grudge. He blinked. Is something wrong? Her lips were a thin line. You tell me. I sat on the bar stool, cross-legged, watching them like it was theater. The note had done its job. Doubt had entered her bloodstream. Now it just needed time to fester. Dad glanced at me, then back at her. Sophie? She picked up her phone and tapped it open. A photo of the note filled the screen. She turned it toward him. He stared, confusion darkening into alarm. What is this? That's your handwriting, she hissed, low and sharp. You left it under my things. What were you planning to say to me? He shook his head. I didn't write that. Don't lie to me, David. I'm not lying. Why would I? He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. You're being paranoid. And just like that, she snapped. Paranoid? Her voice cracked, years younger than usual. Because I found this? Because I've been trying to make this work while you let her manipulate every room she walks into? She looked at me then, eyes rimmed red. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I feigned hurt. What did I do? Sophie turned and stormed out. The door slammed seconds later. Dad slumped into a chair, his spoon untouched. He looked lost. I leaned in gently. She's been tense all week, I whispered. Maybe she doesn't really want me here. He exhaled heavily. She's struggling. This wasn't supposed to be difficult. I placed my hand over his softly. It's okay, Dad, I get it. You don't have to explain. He didn't move his hand, just looked at me, tired and hollow. That afternoon, I found him in the den, sitting alone, half drunk, watching muted television. I sat beside him, tucking my knees beneath me. I miss the old days, I murmured. Back when it was just you, me, and Mom. He sighed. Those weren't perfect either. Maybe not, I agreed, but I felt safer then, like I mattered more. His eyes shifted to mine. Guilt pooled in them, deep and unfiltered. I'm sorry, Maya, he said quietly, for all of it. It was all the permission I needed. I leaned my head on his shoulder, let him wrap an arm around me. There was nothing overtly wrong with the gesture, but it lingered too long. His touch was too hesitant, too unsure of its innocence. I let it stay. That night, I wandered into his room with a blanket clutched in my arms. I had a nightmare, I whispered. He sat up instantly. You okay? I don't know. I just didn't want to be alone. He hesitated, then lifted the blanket. I climbed in, turning my back to him. Neither of us spoke. The silence was full of unspoken weight, each breath measured. I could feel his discomfort, his tension, but he didn't move. He didn't leave. And that was enough. The next morning, Sophie was gone. No note, no message, just the faint scent of her perfume in the hallway and the empty absence of confrontation. Dad sat at the kitchen table staring at his coffee like it might answer him. I joined him, wearing one of his old t-shirts that hung off my frame like a memory. She left, he said hollowly. I saw. I sipped my juice, watching him. Do you want me to stay longer? He looked up, surprised. Would you? Of course, I said sweetly. You need someone who understands you right now. He smiled faintly, tiredly. You've grown into someone I barely recognize. I've just grown up. He nodded slowly, but his gaze lingered, searching, almost studying. Like he was trying to find the child he once knew inside the woman I had become. He wouldn't find her. I made sure of that. That afternoon, I took a photo of myself in his bathroom mirror, his razor, his cologne, and my reflection framed in soft light. I didn't post it. I just stared at it, trying to understand what it meant that I'd gotten this far. Was it revenge? A test? Or something darker? I didn't know yet, but I knew this much. The house was quiet now, and he was looking at me differently. It all unraveled faster than I expected. 3 days after Sophie vanished, Dad's world began to collapse. Quietly, without drama, like a house losing its foundation one invisible crack at a time. He was distant, distracted. Some nights he didn't come out of his room at all. Other times he hovered near me with a strange, uncomfortable stillness, like he didn't know how to exist in his own skin anymore. I didn't push. I waited. Then one morning, while I was making tea, his phone buzzed on the counter. A name flashed across the screen, Sophie. I picked it up without thinking, instinctively. She hadn't called in days. When I answered, she was crying. I need to talk to him, she said, breath hitching. Please, Maya, just tell him. He needs to know I know everything. I saw the messages on your phone. My throat went dry. What messages? There was a pause. Don't lie to me, she snapped, brittle and trembling. You wrote to him. You wrote things. You wanted this. You orchestrated everything. Don't you dare pretend now. I ended the call without answering. When Dad came into the kitchen minutes later, I handed him his phone. My hands trembled, but my face didn't show it. Sophie called, I said. She sounded unstable. He glanced at the screen, then placed it down gently, almost delicately, as if handling something broken. She said something strange, I added carefully. She thinks I hesitated. That I came between you. He didn't look at me, just said softly, Did you? My chest tightened. For a moment, I didn't recognize his voice. It wasn't angry. It wasn't disappointed. It was hollow. I don't know what she means, I whispered. He met my gaze then, and I felt it. That terrible weight of realization, heavy and suffocating. He knew. Not everything. Not the notes, not the imitation handwriting or the timed provocations, but enough. Enough to look at me differently now. Enough to see through the cracks in my mask. I should have drawn boundaries, he said after a long silence. I let the lines blur. You didn't do anything, I replied, voice tight. That's exactly the problem, he murmured. For a moment, I hated him. For making me feel like I was the only villain in a story where he stood idly and let everything unfold. That night, the apartment felt like a mausoleum. Cold, still, suffocating. I packed quietly, folding clothes into my bag while the city buzzed outside. The view from his window no longer looked majestic, just high, detached, far from everything real. He didn't say goodbye when I left, just stood at the door with his arms crossed, lips pressed in a thin line. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it, but I didn't know what for. Take care of yourself, Maya. His voice cracked on my name. I didn't turn back. A week passed before I visited my mother. She opened the door, robe-clad, her face etched with years of bitterness she'd never quite shaken. You look thin, she said instead of hello, then stepped aside to let me in. We drank coffee in silence before she finally asked, How is your father? I stared into my mug. Tired. She nodded. He always was when he was cornered. I looked up. Did you ever love him? Her lips curled into something resembling a smile. Once, but that was before he forgot how to love anyone but himself. I didn't respond. There was no point. Later, in my old bedroom, I stared at my reflection in the cracked vanity mirror. I barely recognized the girl looking back. Hard eyes, tired posture, lips curled in a smirk that never quite reached the eyes. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old photos. One caught my attention. A childhood picture. Me on Dad's shoulders at the beach, both of us laughing, caught in mid-motion. That man didn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. I deleted the photo. Back in the city, I received a message from an unknown number days later. I won't forgive you, but I understand now. Goodbye. No name. But I didn't need one. I locked the screen and slid the phone under my pillow. This wasn't a victory. It wasn't revenge. It was a fracture that now ran through both of us, silent and irreversible. I got his attention. I pulled him close. I exposed every weakness and saw them unravel one by one, but I was the one left holding the pieces. In the end, the trick worked. But something in me broke with it.